Okay, so this isn't the webinar that we put out last Friday. This is a recording after the fact, so there won't be any questions and answers after the webinar. So on Friday, what we covered was branches and locations, and in this short video, I'm going to go through what we covered on that webinar. So branches and locations, these are an important part of locating stock when you're expanding out to a number of different branches, or within a specific branch, you might want to locate your stock within it. And branches and locations are a function in Cin7 that is incredibly handy if you have more than one branch. So before we start looking at this topic, I just want to introduce myself. My name is Daniel Jordan. I'm the Education and Training Coordinator here at Cin7, and I spend a lot of my time training customers, training staff, training partners on how to use Cin7 and how to improve business processes using Cin7 as well. Alright, so who is this session for? Well, new customers, firstly. If you're looking at Cin7 for the first time and you want to learn a bit more about how Cin7 works, then this video will be great for you. Welcome aboard, happy to have you here. If you're an existing customer and you just want to revise this topic, that's great. We're going to go over thoroughly each of the different topics in this session. It's going to be a really good base if you need to learn how to use these functions further. And then lastly, existing customers, if you want to organize your stock better, maybe you've opened a new branch and you need to learn how to create new branches, or maybe you want to organize your stock within a branch, then this webinar is going to be great for you too. All right, before we start, any questions about the content, the support team are always happy to help you. You can contact them, support@cin7.com. They'll be able to talk to you about branches and locations, help you use those better if you have any questions. And then any other webinars in the series are available at vimeo.com/cin7, and you can take a look back over all the webinars that we've done, and of course any questions that you have from those as well, send them through. We're happy to answer them for you. Okay, what are we going to look at in today's session? Well, the first thing we're going to look at is branches and how to use those. Then we're going to take a look at inventory-specific locations and static locations. So those are two different methods of using locations within Cin7, and they maybe require a bit of breaking down into what the differences are between the two and how to use each. They both have fairly separate methods to use. So we'll go into each one and figure out how we can use those best for locating stock within branches. And then finally, I'm just going to end with some tips that I've found through working with customers about how best to use locations. Okay then, so let's start off with branches. And branches are probably the most easiest of the topics that we're going to cover today. Branches are different geographic locations in which you store stock. So maybe you have a warehouse that is separate from your retail branch. That's pretty common. Or it could be that you have multiple locations around the country or even around the world. If you have stock in multiple places, then you're going to be opening different branches in which to store your stock. So to create a branch, we are going to go into the settings page to create the branch, but those branches are stored in the CRM of the system. And then to move stock between the branches, you have to create a branch transfer. So you're taking stock from one branch, creating a transaction called a branch transfer, and moving it into the stock of a new branch. And so your total stock's not going to change, but you'll be able to see the breakdown of stock between all the branches in your system in order to use the system better. All right, so let's dive into the system and let's take a look at how branches are going to be created and used throughout the system. Okay, so I'm logged into my account, and the first thing I'm going to do is just show you where all the branches are stored. If we go to the CRM on the top over here, I can see that there are a number of branches within my CRM, and this is where we store all the CRM details. And if I were to filter this list over here, we'll be able to see all the branches that I have in my system. And you can see that I've got a branch for my warehouse and my new branch over here, my main branch. And I've also got one for consignments, because if you remember the consignments webinar that we did some weeks ago, consignment branches can also be created as branches within the system. So what I'm going to do now is create a new branch. Maybe we'll create a second warehouse for the system. And to do that, I need to go through the settings page. So I can't create the branches from within the CRM. I have to click on my name in the top right-hand corner over here, click on settings. And the next thing I want to do is go over to branches over here and click create new branch. So when you click create new branch, what you'll see is a page very similar to the CRM page. There's going to be the same fields to fill out, plus in addition to that, there's a few more fields specific to branches that we'll need to add in. So the minimum that I need to fill out is the company name, and that's going to be the title of your branch. And for this example, I'm going to call it Warehouse 2. So I've got the name of my branch, and then I can fill out some delivery details or billing details about this branch. And this address details are going to fill out any information within documents like purchase orders or invoices, and also receipt details if you print out from the point of sale. So the next thing that I want to look at is branch details, and there's a few different fields here that I want to explain to you that we're going to go through, and these are specific to branches only. So the first is branch type, and you can see here that I've got 4 different types of branch that I can use. So either a head office, a warehouse, a retail branch, and consignment. Now the first 2, there's probably not much difference between the 2, other than labeling it for your own purposes that it's warehouse. Retail branch, that will allow you to report specifically on any retail branches that you have. So the retail reports dashboard by default filters to all branches that are set to retail branch. So that's quite useful for portioning out your retail branches from the system. And then lastly, you've got your consignment branches, and if you use consignment, which has specific functionality that we've covered before in another webinar, you'll be assigning this branch as a consignment branch. Because this is a warehouse, we're going to use the second option here, which is warehouse. The next option down is the alternative GL account or cost center. And this is useful if you have set up your account software in such a way that you want sales from specific branches to be passed through to general ledger accounts within your accounting software. So when you make sales from, say, your retail branch, if you want those pushed through to a specific retail branch general ledger account in your accounting software, you're going to do it from there. And we'll probably cover this in more detail when we look at alternative general ledger accounts within an accounting-based webinar. The second option down is tax status. And for most countries outside the US, that's probably not going to be very useful. But if you're in the US, what you'll find is that different branches may have different tax rates depending on state or county. And so you might want to assign a specific tax rate to a branch. And if this is appropriate for you, you may need some help setting this up, and we're happy to do that through our accounting specialists. The last option, and this will disappear once you've managed to have some stock transactions, is the option to use it in non-stop mode. Non-stop mode allows you to make transactions without making any stock movements within the system. And this is quite useful for testing the system if you need to, or if there's a specific reason why you might not want to use stock within a branch. But usually we suggest that you manage the stock for your system, so you're purchasing in stock, selling stock, and stock is moving between. That's what Cin7 is designed for. It's an inventory system. So more than likely, more often than not, you're going to be using managed stock unless under specific circumstances. And then lastly, we've got this branch locations box, and we're going to use this, and we'll come across this later when we look at locations, but we can use this box to show you how to, where you're going to place products within your branch. So for instance, we may want to enter in a zone over here, and then we can enter in bins within that zone by adding them underneath. We're going to put a space, then a dash, and then bin 1. And we can continue to do that for every bin that we've got within the system. And then we could do zone 2, for instance, and you're going to be using the names actually of the zones. And so that could be maybe row 2, and then within that you've got shelf 1, shelf 2, something like that. So we'll come back to this in more detail when we look at locations and what that means, where it will appear. For the time being though, let's save this. I'm happy with this branch, so let's save this branch. And the important thing to do, currently at least, is when you save a branch, you'll find that it probably won't appear in your branches menus in any of your transactions until the point where you log out of the system and then log back in again. And so in order for branches to appear, you'll have to create a, let's have a look. If we create a new purchase order, we'll take a look at the branches, and you'll see that our second warehouse hasn't appeared yet. But what I'll do is I'll log out, log back in again. And we should be able to see over here that we have our, there we are, our warehouse 2. So we've created a new branch, we've filled out all the right fields. The next thing is we need to put some stock into that branch. So I guess the first way to put stock into any branch in the system is to create a purchase order. And we can do that here. We'd be choosing the right branch, we'd be creating the warehouse, and then we can just enter in a purchase order. I'll use my test product. And then I can fully receive that into the branch. And that's going to bring stock into that branch. And if I go back to the products module after bringing stock into the system, what I can find is that I have stock broken down by clicking on the stock on hand column by branch. So I can see that I've got 19 in my main branch, 1 in my warehouse, and 1 in my second warehouse. So by breaking down the stock figures, this is really useful for you to see how much stock you have at any point in time throughout the system. Now the next thing I want to show you is how we're going to bring stock from one branch to another using branch transfers. So once we've created stock in our different branches, we're going to need to move them between stock, and a likely scenario is that you'll be receiving stock into your warehouse and then moving them to, say, a retail branch. And we do that using a transaction called a branch transfer. And they can be found on the left-hand navigation over here if we click on stock. And then we're going to choose branch transfers. And I'll create a branch transfer so we can see the process of moving stock from one place to another. The first thing is to create a new branch transfer. And then we're going to look at 2 things. So the first thing is where we're transferring the stock from. And in this case, we want the stock to go from our second warehouse. So I can choose that over here, warehouse 2. And then we're going to choose where we're transferring that stock to. So I'm going to transfer that rugby ball that I just bought, and I'm going to move that from my warehouse, and I'm going to move it to, say, the new branch. So that maybe this is my retail branch somewhere in the city. So the next thing I want to do, now that I've chosen where I'm going from and where I'm going to, is that I want to enter the code for my product. So let's enter in the rugby ball here. Well, I've only got 1 of them in stock, so I'm just going to transfer 1. And the next thing I'm going to do is approve it. Now, it could be that within the warehouse, I've got my pick team out there waiting for approved branch transfers to come through. And what they're going to do is they'll pick that up once it's been approved. So maybe they're looking at the branch transfer list. Maybe they've filtered it by those that have been approved. And then they will be going back into it to dispatch the stock from the warehouse. And they'll do that by either entering a dispatch date in, or they can go into each line item individually and dispatch them. It kind of does the same thing. So by entering a dispatch date, what's going to happen now is that stock is going to move out of stock, but because we still own the stock, it's in transit, it's moving it into a special location called a holding location. And what that does is keeps that stock in limbo while it's traveling between the 2 branches. And we're going to then see in the products menu, in the products list, how that stock has become part of the holding stock over here. So this is quite an important function in the system. When we've got stock moving around, it's going to be moving into holding stock, and then when it gets received back into the other branch, that holding stock is going to move back into our stock on hand. And I can show you that now. So if we go back to our branch transfer, and if we go to stock, branch transfers, and then we're going to click on the transfer, and so this will be the people at the retail branch are going to be receiving this in. They can do this through the point of sale as well. They're going to click on the completed and received date, and this is going to be bringing the stock into the transfer to branch, the new branch. If we click save and back to list, what we'll see is that if we go back to the products one last time, we'll be able to see that the stock has moved from our second warehouse and it's moved into the new branch over here. As you can see, I've got one over here, and it actually tells me the specific branch transfer that I have used to get that stock into that place. And we can quickly recall that by clicking on the link over here. Alright, so that is branch transfers. We've just taken a look at how to create one, how to move stock from one branch to another. So once you've set up the branches, it could be that you have quite a big warehouse and you want to locate stock within that warehouse so that you know exactly where to pick it from. And this kind of takes us on to looking at locations. So let's bring back my presentation again. And let's take a look at a different type of location. The first one we're going to take a look at is inventory specific locations. So inventory specific locations have very specific properties. Zones and bins are assigned to each inventory item in the system. So what that means is that every item of stock can have its own zone and bin assigned to it. So that has some benefits in that we can have lots and lots of different locations. In fact, you could potentially have as many locations as you have products. And that enables us to maybe locate, if you have one product that appears in 4 or 5 different places, you can allocate certain stock items to different places all over your warehouse. So it's a really detailed way to manage your stock because you can go to that level of granularity. But at the same time, we've got to bear in mind that by detailing your stock this way, it makes the stock take quite difficult at the end because you have to figure out when you're counting your stock, which specific location you're counting it in, that sort of thing. So yeah, there's 2 things to bear in mind. It's very detailed, but it does make stock take more difficult at the end. And as we go and look at the next method, what we'll find is it's a less detailed way, but it's an easier way to do stock take. So it's all about making a decision about what's right for your business. What I'll do is I'll show you how we can do inventory specific locations. So let's dive back into the system. And the first thing I'm going to do is I am going to purchase some stock. And I'm going to show you how you can purchase the stock and then receive it into specific inventory specific locations. So we'll start off in the purchase orders module again, and you've got a list here. We'll create a new purchase order, and we're going to purchase just like we did before. And I'm going to choose my warehouse 2, which is the branch that I'm going to be purchasing the stock into. And I'm going to choose my rugby ball again. Now, this is pretty familiar to you, so the next thing though is where the locations come into play. Now, instead of clicking fully received, as I would normally do to receive anything in the transaction, what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to click on the quantity received box down here, and you'll see over here I've got 2 extra fields, 2 fields that you may not have noticed before, zone and bin, and these fields can be used to allocate zones and bins to the inventory items that I'm receiving. So it could be that I want to type in my own zones and bins, and I can do that by saying row 3, and then shelf 2. You can do that yourself, or it could be that you want to use some predefined zones and bins that you may have chosen elsewhere. So you'll remember that when I set up the branch, what I did was, and if we go into warehouse 2, I entered in some zones and bins in my branch locations. And you'll remember that what I did was enter in the zone first on the first line, and then on a new line, I'm going to enter in my bin. And I might have said before that you should put a space in, but actually you just dive in straight ahead and put a dash. So you're going to have the zone on the first line and press enter, and then you're going to put dash bin, and that's going to be your first one. And you'll keep doing that for as many bins as you have in the system. There's no limit to the amount of bins and zones that you have. As long as they have the dash in front of them, then that's going to create them as zones and bins in the system. And the order at which they appear is the order that they're going to be picked in. So the ones at the top, so these ones here, are going to show on pick slips and in the pick impact module before products that are further down. And that enables you to order your bin locations so that your pickers, when they're going out into the warehouse, are able to pick certain items before they pick other items. So that's quite a handy way of making sure that your pickers are picking in the most efficient way as they go around the warehouse. So as you can see, if I've entered those in, when I come to receive my goods, when I click into zone, I get the zones that I've entered into the system. And then once you click on one zone, then it's going to pre-populate the bins as well, so I can choose the bins within that specific row. So it's showing me only the shelves that I've allocated to row 2. If we look back in the system, row 2 over here has got shelf 1 and shelf 2, and in the same way I've got shelf 1 and shelf 2 here as my bin location. So I'm going to pick shelf 2 here. Now it could be that you have multiple products that you want to order, and you might want to put those into different bins and zones through the system, and that's easily done too. So you can add another row, and you can, what you can do is you can put 3 in here, I'm going to put 2 in here, and then we're going to choose, this time I'm going to put some in shelf 1, which is fine. I'm going to put different inventory items in different bin locations. So let's click save, and I'll show you how this appears in the product. I'm going to fully receive it as well now that I've received all the goods, and approve back to list. Let's go and take a look at the products module, and we'll see how these rows, bins and zones show themselves within the system. If I click on stock on hand over here again, what I'll be able to see is that we'll see down here in my warehouse 2, those 5 rugby balls that I've received into the system have been located in 2 different places. Just like in the receiving box that pops up, I've got my zone and bin over here. And then you can see this over here, I've got 2 in row 2, shelf 1, and I've got 3 in row 2, shelf 2. So each individual inventory item is being assigned a different zone and bin, and you can do that for potentially every single item. So each of those 5 could have a different zone and bin if I wanted to. But the thing to remember is that when you're doing a stock take, it's going to make things more complicated if you've got products in lots of different bins. So what happens now if I want to change the location of a product within the zones and bins and the locations in the system? So for inventory specific locations, we'll need a special module called bin location transfers. And to enable this module for your Cin7 account, you'll need to contact the support team to get it to add in. It's free to do so, but we'll just need to add it in manually for you because not everyone uses this module. And what the module looks like, it's very similar to other transactions that you might have made in the system. You've got your list of transactions down here and the ability to make a new transaction. So let's create a new location transfer. And what we want to do within that warehouse, we're going to move some of the rugby balls elsewhere. So we're just going to move one of them, and what we're going to do is we're going to enter in where we want to move it to, and I'm going to choose zone and bin 1 over here. And then the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pick the inventory items that I want to move And in this case, I want to move one of these two rugby balls over here. So I'm going to choose with the green arrow the stock that I'm moving. That's going to move it over here. Let's just choose the zone. Make sure that it doesn't overwrite. And then I'm going to click save. And what that's going to do is that's going to move that one item that I've chosen from one location to another. So it's pretty simple. It's not a case of moving it out and then back in again. All we're doing is overwriting the zones and bins on that stock line. So we're going to approve that and back to list, and let's just take another look at the products module just to confirm that that's been moved. So if I click on stock on hand again, what I should see when I scroll down is that, yep, within warehouse 2 now, I've got one item in that original zones and bin up here. And then under 1, I've got another item, zone and bin 1 there. Now, one other thing I want to mention about inventory specific locations is that when you come to sell those products, you'll need to make sure that you are dispatching the right product from the right location. So let's take a look at a sales order, and we'll create a sales order from our warehouse 2. So I'm going to create a sales order as I would do normally. I'm going to enter in a customer, and I'm going to make sure my branch is selected to the right branch. And I'm going to enter in the product that I want to dispatch, and in this case it's my rugby ball. And when I'm dispatching my rugby ball, I want to make sure that the product that I've picked is coming from the right location. So this could be the pickers within your warehouse are going to be having to come back to the sales order module, and they're coming in here to choose the location that they're picking that product from. So they're clicking into the quantity dispatch column, and you can see underneath we've got all of our inventory under here, and we've got our zones and bins specifically mentioned. And what I need to do is click the arrow from the location that I want to dispatch the product from. So I'm going to click over here, and then I'm going to click save. And what that's going to do is that's going to dispatch that specific ball from that specific location. And finally, I'm going to fully dispatch that order, and that's going to clear that order from my open orders list. So that particular point is really important for the pickers to be aware of. If they're picking stock from locations, they must come back into the system and choose the location from which they picked that inventory from. Because you can imagine if they just use the first in, first out method to choose the inventory, then that would cause them to choose it from a location that wasn't correct. And very quickly, I think if you're not aware of the locations that you're using, things are going to get out of sync, because you've got stock in locations that aren't correct, and you've got stock that doesn't exist in locations within your system. So it's going to be quite a difficult method to use if you're not really careful. The same goes for moving stock within your warehouse. If you're using inventory specific locations, you may think, oh, well, just to be tidy, I'm moving this ball up a shelf. But if you don't note that within the system using a bin location transfer, then you're going to find that all your locations are not correct. And maybe that's another thing to mention with bin location transfers. If you're moving stock, you've got to make sure that you make a bin location transfer to coordinate that movement. So that's inventory specific locations. What I want to just go through quickly is where those inventory specific locations appear. So inventory specific locations will appear in documents, but that might require some customization, and that can be done through your either the customer success specialist that's dealing with you as you go through the onboarding phase, or it could be the support team. If you contact the support team, they can customize the documents to have locations appear in there. They will appear in any stock report, so such as the stock on hand report, for instance. That will show you the bin and zone locations too. You can drag those into the reports. Transactions, any transactions that you do, they will appear when you pop up the receipting out or receipting in. So when you're receiving purchase orders, you'll be able to see where other stock is within those locations, or you can allocate locations to the stock. And when you're selling the items as well, you'll be able to choose from what location you want to dispatch the stock from. And then finally, within the open to sell, as you've seen in the stock on hand, in the products module, when you're clicking on the stock on hand column, you'll be able to see all the locations of the products inventory within that stock on hand box. So that's the most complex method, but what I want to look at now is a newer method that we've added into the system, and it's probably the one that I recommend when I'm talking to customers. It's the one that I recommend they use, simply because it is it's the easiest to use, I'd say. Conceptually, it's a lot easier, and it also makes stock taking a lot easier as well. So we call these static locations. So static locations are assigned to products within a branch, but not the individual inventory. And what that means is that for each product in a branch, it can appear in either two locations. So this will allow you to say, within this branch, this product is either here in the first location or here in the second location. You won't know how much inventory is in either, but you'll know that if I'm looking for this product, well, the first place I'm going to look is here, and then if it's not in here, I'm going to look in this other location. And so by assigning only two locations to a product and not inventory items, that makes it quite an easy method to use for locations. And secondly, it's going to make your stock take a lot easier as well, because you're just assigning a location to a product as opposed to the actual specific number of inventory items for that product. So let's take a look at how that works, and it actually is a lot different to the specific inventory specific locations that we looked at earlier. It's almost a completely different method. So inventory specific locations are done through the stock take master, and it's something that we looked at briefly when we looked at the stock take master before, but we didn't really go into any detail, so I want to take the time to take a look at that properly now. Now, the first thing I want to do when I go into the stock take master is I want to choose the specific branch that I am looking to create locations for. So you'll remember from the stock take webinar that we did, the stock take master can only be used for one branch at a time, because we're always counting a specific branch's stock. We're not looking at the stock across your system. So over on the left hand side, I'm going to choose the branch first of all. Really important thing to remember to do when you are looking at the branch level locations. And then the second thing is we're going to change the update mode. So far we've only looked at the stock counts update mode. This time we're going to change to zones and bins, because this is going to allow us to alter the zones and bins for these products. Now you can see within this module I only have two products in my warehouse. I've only got stock of only two products within warehouse 2. And as you can see over here, we've got no zones and bins for these products yet. So these are no static locations for these products. And as you can see as well, it's very different to the inventory specific locations, because we've already assigned these 5 products to inventory specific locations. But because they have no static locations, no locations are appearing here. So that can be a little confusing, and often we get customers confused between the two methods, which is fair enough. It could be a little confusing unless you know the difference. So even though this rugby ball does have some stock in different inventory specific locations, these 5 balls over here, the static locations currently are blank, and it's these static locations that we're looking to update through this process. So what I want to do is I want to put these 10 footballs, I want to say where I'm going to locate them. And to do that, what we do, very similar to a stock take, is we export some of the data, edit it in our spreadsheet, and then we're going to be updating it through the system to add these footballs into a specific place. So it's very easy to see. What I'm going to do is I'm going to filter it by the football to take away that rugby ball so it doesn't confuse us. And then we should only have there we go, 1 product in our list. And then I'm going to export this data from the system. Really easily done. All we need to do, we'll click on zones and bins, We'll click on name as well. And the system will export everything else that's required to do the update automatically. So all we need to do is click update data. You'll notice that the system included the code there as well. If you have duplicate codes for any reason, you'll need to fix those because it's updating based on that code column. So if you have duplicates, it won't know what location to update. So making sure you don't have duplicates, a really important part of this process. So let's copy the data in this box and we're going to post it into our Excel spreadsheet. I'm going to do this over here. And then what I'm going to do within my spreadsheet is I'm going to add some zones and bins to my spreadsheet. So for instance, I'm going to use the quick pick bay, and this is going to be on shelf 1. So I've dealt with a lot of customers that when they're picking, they have their frequently ordered products on their on a bay right at the front so that they can just grab it if they're packing things. But they also have somewhere in the warehouse behind where they keep the rest of the stock, and they'll replenish this stock to the quick pick bay as they run down on those frequently ordered items. Seems like a really good way to organize your warehouse. So let's put the location warehouse, and then it's going to be row B. Actually, maybe we'll do row B, and then we're going to do shelf 6, something like that. So we've got two locations here, and what we're saying here is that the product can either be found in the quick pick bay on shelf 1, or it can be found on row B, shelf 6. We're not saying how many of each inventory item is in each. We don't really care. All we know is that that product can be found in this place or that place. And what that means is that for this branch, it can only appear in 2 places. We don't mind, we don't have to worry about how much stock is in each. We don't have to transfer the number of stock between the 2. All we're saying is it can be found in one place or the other. So I want to update my system with this information. So I'm going to copy it here. I'm going to paste it back into update zones and bins like so. And then I'm going to click update zones and bins like so. It's going to ask me to confirm, so it's showing me the data that I'm importing, and that's great. I'm going to click confirm. Then once it's done that, tells me it's a success, and then it's going to go back and sync settings to view updates. Great, all done. So what we can see now is we're looking at our football, and we can see that it is in either zone 1, bin 1, zone 2, or bin 2. And then if we want to update this, then that's really easily done as well. So what we're going to have to do is just do like we did before. We're going to select it all, copy it, paste it back into the system, and then we can change this to row 7. Say we've moved the balls up a shelf, and then we're going to paste this back in here, and then we're going to go through the update process again, confirm, go back, and then we should have, provided we sync settings, we can see that we've moved it now to shelf 7. So as you can see, that's a really quick way of moving stock from one place to another. And it's a lot quicker when you've got a lot of products split all around your warehouse. It's an easy way to note where that product is without having to get into the fine detail of how much inventory item is in each. So what I want to take a look at now then is where that information appears. So if we go back to my presentation, so static locations appear in different places too. So all locations are sorted in order of the location within the branch. So let's just, we'll go back to our CRM. As you'll remember, when we entered into the branch, the locations over here, we entered them in a specific order. And so if the names of these zones and bins match what you enter into the stock take master, then when you use the pick and pack or print out a pick document, the products will appear in the order that you have put into here, provided that the names in the stock take master match the branch locations that you entered into the system. So let's take a look. So the locations are going to appear in that order in the pick and pack, in the stock take master, as we've just seen, and in documents like the pick slip. So that means that you'll be able to pick your products from your warehouse in the pick and pack in the most efficient way in the order that we have defined within the branch. So the last thing I want to do is just go through some location tips. These are tips, I guess, that I've accrued working with customers using locations. The first thing to say is don't use a system if a system isn't needed. So I've dealt with a lot of customers that are trying to find a system to make sure that maybe staff pick from a certain place. And I think it's important to sometimes remember that some things are solved really well by a system, like inventory is solved really well by using an inventory system. But sometimes trying to get people to do the right thing is not a system problem, I suppose, it's a human problem. And maybe the best way to tackle that is some sort of reminder on the locations that they shouldn't do something. Because in my experience at least, a system is not going to stop people's bad habits. It's just going to make life more complicated. And I think this is something to bear in mind, especially for those inventory specific bin locations. If you're spending a lot of time doing administration to make people do the right thing, then maybe it's not the system that's at fault. Maybe we need to think about the process as a whole and how you can improve that in order to make sure people do it without having to do all that admin that's involved. And we kind of hear this a lot from companies, trying to figure out ways of locating their stock. I think ultimately, though, you're trying to avoid using a system if a system isn't needed. So with inventory-specific stock, you've got to remember that the stock take is quite manual as well. So what you're required to do if you do a stock take with inventory-specific stock, doing a stock take is going to wipe all of your inventory-specific locations, and then you have to do a bin location transfer to then reassign all that inventory back to those locations that you've created. So that is quite a manual way, and there's quite a lot of effort invested in inventory-specific locations. It's not to say that people don't use it, and they do, but just bear in mind that there's that manual aspect of it as well. And so that's why I say, A, don't use the system if it isn't needed, and secondly, consider using those static locations if at all possible, because that's a really quick and easy way to assign locations to products within a branch. Okay, so that's all from me, but as I say, if you have any questions about locations or branches, happy to answer them. Just email support@cin7.com and maybe title it in your subject line webinar, and we're happy to get back to you about that. And I'll see you next time.